But first, there's a government fund to help pay for Grenfell-type cladding to be removed from privately owned tower blocks. Here's the then Housing Minister, James Brokenshire, announcing that fund back in May.
We will be putting in place a new fund for private buildings to deal with this issue of safety and indeed this issue of leaseholders who live in these buildings, the stress and strain that they have in knowing the condition of their building, but equally the time it has been taking to see that the materials are remediated. And what we're talking about here is the use of aluminium composite material cladding, the same cladding that was used on the Grenfell Tower, and obviously with all of the implications that that has highlighted.
But 6 months on, only one tower block with dangerous Grenfell-style cladding has passed the initial stage of approval from the fund to qualify for any money. People living at the block, it's called North Point Tower, it's in Bromley in south east London, have told this programme that although they were initially pleased to be the first to qualify for help, the government has set impossible deadlines for releasing the money. Our reporter Melanie Abbott's been looking into it.
Yeah, you may remember that the government created this fund when it became clear that some building owners, those are the companies owning the freehold of these flats, and some of the developers who built them were arguing over who should pay up to remove this dangerous cladding. The government didn't want to pay, but as we've reported on You and Yours, terrified people were living in dangerous buildings with no answers about how to make them safe as pressure increased on the government almost 2 years after the Grenfell fire. That £200 million was set aside to pay for the work to remove this cladding.
So what's happened since, Mel?
Well, the fund didn't open for applications until September, and latest government figures show that out of 86 buildings eligible for money from the fund, only one has received what's called pre-tender approval. Now, as that sounds, it's a very initial stage. It involves around £50,000 and it's to pay for consultants and solicitors to work out how to appoint surveyors. So not even at the stage of getting a survey for the works done. Ritu Sahar lives in North Point Tower and she has been trying to sort this out. She helped set up the UK Cladding Action Group and she told me that they are really worried now about just how much needs to be done to get to the next stage.
We only found out what would be required in the middle of September. The next step is after the consultants are appointed, they would do the necessary checks on the building, including looking at all the building drawings and all the other information that we can provide. Then they go out to tender to people who would come in and do the survey. And after that report, the consultants would provide us a scope of work to get rid of the dangerous cladding and put new cladding in its place.
When you realised there were this many steps, what did you think?
Well, the first thought was that we would definitely never meet the funding deadlines. December of this year, that is going to be quite impossible, I think, to meet. Appointing surveyors, getting the survey done, getting the report.
Is it putting extra stress on you, having to sort all of this out, knowing there is such a tight deadline?
I mean, having to live in a dangerous building, trying to grapple with issues such as managing a project of this size and magnitude, thinking about all the things that might go wrong and everything that we need to do creates an additional really high level of stress on everybody involved. I have absolutely no experience of either property management. To have been thrown into this really incredibly difficult and stressful situation causes a lot of anxiety. I'm sure not just to me, but to lots of other people who are in this situation.
But Mel, why are people like Ritu Saha having to organise to do all this work for themselves?
Well, it's a good question which really you could ask any of the freehold owners of these blocks or the developers who are arguing about how to make them safe. Now, the government's always said replacing the cladding is the building owner's responsibility. So it is the responsibility of the companies that bought the freeholds for these tower blocks from the developers. The government fund is for when these companies do refuse to step in. And that often happens because they think it is the developers who are responsible for the dangerous cladding. And that's exactly what Citystead, the company which owns North Point Tower, told me. It bought the block from Taylor Wimpey back in 2007, and it points out it wasn't involved in installing the cladding at all, which anyway was certified as meeting building regulations at the time. Citystead does say it's committed to the safety of the residents and has commissioned and paid for expert reports and is in regular contact with those who are living there. But people in blocks like this, they're just caught in the middle often. North Point was developed by Alfred McAlpine, a company which then was bought out by Taylor Wimpey, whose chief executive, Peter Redfern, has just rather controversially cashed in almost £4 million worth of his shares. News which Ritu found particularly hard to hear.
Taylor Wimpey bought over our developer with the assets and liabilities. Unfortunately, since then, Taylor Wimpey have said that they do not have a legal obligation to remediate the cladding on our block. Ironically, the estimates that we have are that the remediation of cladding at North Point might cost in the region of around £4 million. So
that is ironic.
It is. Taylor Wimpey is an extremely successful company, and their profit before tax was more than £600 million. This is really a drop in the ocean to fix the cladding at North Point. So we are obviously incredibly disappointed at Taylor Wimpey's stance. Other developers across the country have done the right thing because it was the morally right thing to do. Obviously, Taylor Wimpey is extremely reputable and known across the country. We hope that they will do the right thing, but it is definitely disappointing to see one employee of the company can cash in so much money in shares, which would actually save the lives of 57 families at North Point.
Emil, what did Taylor Wimpey then say to you in response to that? And what did the government say in response to the difficulty these people are having getting money from this fund?
Well, Taylor Wimpey, firstly, they sent me a statement saying that they are supporting all parties in trying to find a resolution, even though they didn't develop the original site and have no legal responsibility. And the government, in fact, last month praised Taylor Wimpey for stepping forward and paying to replace cladding in buildings which it does still own. Taylor Wimpey has set aside £30 million for this. Now, for the government, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government says that it has made clear that remediation work should happen as quickly as possible. And staff there told me that if exceptional circumstances do delay an application or the work itself, then the people living in those blocks should contact them immediately.
Melanie Abbott, thank you for that. You're listening to You and Yours, Radio 4's consumer programme. It's 26 minutes past 12.